The chamber was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that carries weight. Papers rustled, cameras clicked, and then it happened. A laugh. Not a laugh of joy, not a laugh of humor, but a sharp, dismissive chuckle. Senator Lindsey Graham leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, lips curling in mock amusement. As if the very idea of listening to Representative Jasmine Crockett was beneath him. That sound, that smug burst of arrogance sliced through the room like a blade. For a moment, even the microphones seemed to catch their breath. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked, eager for a fight. But Jasmine Crockett, she didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or raise her voice. She sat there, steady, her expression calm, her silence louder than Graham's laughter. And that's where the story begins, with a laugh that was meant to belittle, but instead became the spark for one of the most powerful moments in recent political memory. Because this wasn't just an exchange between two lawmakers. It was something bigger, something raw. A clash between two visions of America, one dripping with entitlement and mockery, the other rooted in dignity, truth, and an unshakable will. To be heard, in that instant, the stage was set. Lindsey Graham, the seasoned politician, accustomed to sneering away opposition, thought he'd gotten the upper hand with a single, condescending chuckle. But what he didn't realize was that the laugh wasn't the end of the story. It was the trigger. The match. The beginning of a moment that millions would replay, share, and remember. And Jasmine, she was ready. Every second of her journey. Every battle in courtrooms. Every fight for justice in Texas. Every hard-earned victory in Congress had prepared her for this moment. The room hung in suspense. The cameras zoomed closer. The audience leaned in. Graham laughed, but the world would soon stop laughing with him, because what Jasmine Crockett said next would leave the entire chamber stunned and send shockwaves far beyond those walls. Cliffhanger gives, and when the words left her mouth, the laughter died instantly. The laugh hung in the air, echoing like a gavel strike. But this moment wasn't just about a chuckle. It was about everything that laugh represented. Because Lindsey Graham's sneer wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening in a room meant for accountability. For serious debate about the direction of the country. Every senator, every representative gathered was supposed to be there in service of the people. And yet, in that instant, Graham's laughter reduced the chamber to something else entirely. A stage for arrogance. To Graham, it might have felt routine, a smirk, a scoff, a dismissal of someone he considered unworthy of his time. But to millions watching at home, and to every person in the room who knew what was at stake, it felt like a throwback to something uglier, a symbol of who gets to speak with authority in America and who gets laughed at for daring to try. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another voice in that chamber. She was a freshman lawmaker, a black woman, civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, carrying on her shoulders the weight of every voice too often mocked, ignored, or silenced. And Lindsey Graham? He wasn't just laughing at her words. He was laughing at what she represented. The stakes were bigger than either of them. This wasn't simply about two politicians disagreeing. This was about respect, about who holds power and how they wield it, about whether mockery can pass as argument or whether truth can cut through arrogance. And viewers knew it. Within seconds of that smirk crossing Graham's face, phones were out, cameras locked in. Clips began circulating on social media. Before the exchange had even ended, people weren't just watching politics unfold. They were watching a cultural confrontation, one that spoke to the heart of America's divides. Would Jasmine Crockett retreat under the weight of that laugh? Would she falter? Would she rise? The tension built with every heartbeat. The room, already charged, grew hotter with anticipation. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that mockery often precedes downfall. Arrogance invites, humility, and that laugh. That laugh was about to backfire spectacularly. It was more than a chuckle. It was a challenge. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to let it go unanswered. The stage was set. One side armed with dismissal and derision. The other prepared with calm precision and a fire honed through years of struggle. This wasn't going to be a polite back and forth. This was going to be a reckoning. The laugh in that moment became symbolic. It wasn't just Graham mocking Crockett. It was every gatekeeper, every old guard voice, every smirk that tried to silence someone daring to step into power. But Jasmine knew something Lindsey Graham didn't. When you laugh at the wrong person, you give them the microphone they need. And in just seconds, she was about to seize it. Cliffhanger gives because when Graham leaned back, convinced of his dominance, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, and what she said would change the tone of the entire room. To understand why Lindsey Graham's laugh struck such a nerve, you have to understand the man behind it, because that smirk wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the culmination of a career built on contradictions, survival tactics, and a talent for arrogance disguised as charm. Lindsey Olin Graham, the senator from South Carolina, a man who has stood at the center of power for decades. To his supporters, he's a savvy operator. To his critics, he's something else entirely, a politician who bends with the wind, trading principle for proximity to power. It wasn't always this way. Early in his career, Graham cultivated an image as a straight talker, a conservative, willing to speak uncomfortable truths. He fashioned himself as a man of integrity, quick to criticize corruption, unafraid to call out hypocrisy. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The straight talk gave way to double talk. Principled voice gave way to the political survivor. And with that shift came something else, an arrogance that grew sharper with every election, every television appearance, every moment when the cameras turned his way. He became the senator who could laugh off accountability, shrugged off contradictions, and sneer at those who dared to challenge him. Consider the flip-flops. He once called Donald Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. Just months later, he was golfing with him, defending him, reshaping his rhetoric to stay in the inner circle of power. The shift wasn't subtle, it was jarring. And with every pivot, the smirk seemed to grow. Or look at the hearings, the times when Graham's temper flared, his laughter sneered, his patience ran thin. Whether it was Supreme Court confirmations, investigations, or oversight hearings, Graham's signature move became obvious. Mock the opposition, belittle their arguments, and laugh as if he alone carried the wisdom of the room. And that's why the laugh at Jasmine Crockett mattered so much. It wasn't just a moment of disrespect. It was the latest chapter in a long story of arrogance. Because Graham's laugh wasn't aimed at the facts. It was aimed at the person, at her identity, at what she represented. For years, Lindsey Graham has embodied the old guard of American politics, the men who believe power is theirs by default, who believe mockery can silence challengers. His critics argue that he thrives on dismissiveness, that his laughter isn't about humor at all, but about control. A way of saying, you don't matter, your words don't matter, only mine do. Arrogance, but here's the irony. Arrogance blinds. Laugh, intended as a weapon, became his undoing. Because in dismissing Jasmine Crockett with a chuckle, he underestimated her, and in underestimating her, he underestimated the very forces reshaping American politics. The cameras didn't just catch a laugh, they caught the face of entitlement. The embodiment of every sneer that tells younger voices, marginalized voices, women's voices, stay in your place. But Lindsey Graham didn't realize the audience was no longer laughing with him. Times had changed. The country had changed. And millions were waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up and turn that mockery into a moment of truth. That's where Jasmine Crockett came in. Because across the table sat not just a congresswoman, but a fighter forged in the fire of struggle. And every ounce of Graham's arrogance, every condescending smirk, every smug laugh, was about to collide with something stronger: composure, courage, and the power of truth. Cliffhanger gives, but Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in that chamber. To understand why she didn't flinch, we have to go back to the battles that shaped her into the woman who would silence Lindsey Graham. Laugh symbolized the old guard, clinging to power. Then Jasmine Crockett's silence in that moment symbolized something new, a different America, one built not on mockery, but on resilience. To understand why she didn't flinch, why she didn't crumble under that condescending chuckle, you have to understand Jasmine's story. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive in Washington by accident. She wasn't born into political privilege, wasn't handed power through legacy or inheritance. Her journey was one of grit, sacrifice, and defiance in the face of odds that were never stacked in her favor. Long before she stepped onto the floor of Congress, Jasmine was in the trenches of justice. She began her career as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, standing up for the voiceless, representing the people's society, too often overlooked the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten, in those courtrooms. She learned something Graham's laughter would never teach, that dignity is not given, it's fought for. Every cross-examination, every uphill case, every moment when she was told she didn't belong, those were her training grounds. While others laughed her off, she sharpened her arguments. While others tried to box her in, she broke through with precision and clarity. Her leap into politics came not from ambition, but from necessity. When lawmakers pushed voter suppression laws designed to silence communities like hers, Jasmine didn't just stand on the sidelines. She ran for office. She fought in the State House. She became a voice of resistance, willing to walk out, to protest, to put her career on the line to protect democracy. And when she arrived in Washington, she carried that same fire. In a Congress often dominated by seniority, Crockett didn't shrink. She leaned into her role, unafraid to challenge hypocrisy, unafraid to call out injustice, unafraid to confront power even when the odds weren't in her favor. That's why Graham's laugh didn't faze her. Because by the time she sat across from him, Jasmine Crockett had already faced down much worse. She had faced dismissive judges, condescending colleagues, and the weight of systemic bias. His laugh was just another in a long line of attempts to silence her, and every attempt before had only made her stronger. To millions watching, her story resonated. She wasn't a polished political insider playing the game. She was an outsider who had fought her way in, carrying the lived experiences of the people she represented. She spoke not as someone seeking approval from the powerful, but as someone demanding accountability from them. That's what made this confrontation different. For Graham, the exchange was routine, another opportunity to wave away a voice he didn't take seriously. For Crockett, it was destiny, a chance to embody every courtroom battle, every march, every hard-earned lesson that had prepared her for this exact moment. And that's the brilliance of Jasmine's rise. She understood something fundamental. Power doesn't just reside in titles. It resides in truth, resides in composure, resides in the courage to stand tall when someone tries to laugh you down. When Graham chuckled, she didn't rush to respond. She didn't snap back in anger. Instead, she held steady. Because Crockett knew the real blow wasn't the laugh itself. It was what would follow. The argument, the precision, the mic drop. A moment that would silence the chamber and send shockwaves across the country. This is why millions later cheered her on. Because her rise wasn't just about her. It was about every person who has ever been dismissed in a meeting, laughed at for daring to speak up, or belittled for being different. In that chamber, Jasmine carried all of them with her. And when Lindsey Graham underestimated her, when he leaned back in arrogance, Jasmine leaned forward in purpose. The clash was inevitable. The laugh had lit the fuse. And now her story was about to explode into the kind of moment that changes reputations, rewrites narratives, and reminds the powerful that arrogance has limits. Cliffhanger gives the room. Grew tense. Graham thought he was in control. But what came next would prove that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was the biggest mistake of his career. The silence after Graham's laugh was deafening. For a split second, the room seemed frozen. Aides shuffling papers stopped mid-motion. Cameras tightened their zoom, and the audience leaned forward, bracing for what would happen next. Graham tilted his head back, still smirking as if daring Jasmine Crockett to challenge him. His body language screamed condescension. Arms crossed, chin high, a look that said, "I've done this before. You won't rattle me." But what he didn't realize was that this wasn't going to be business as usual. This wasn't another routine sparring match where the seasoned senator swatted away opposition. Across the table sat someone who didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for millions. The exchange began subtly. Graham threw out barbed comments, veiled his questions. He interrupted, feigned amusement, and punctuated his interruptions with that same dismissive laugh. To some in the chamber, it looked like he was in control. But to others, it was obvious. He was rattled. His laughter was no longer confidence. It was cover, and Jasmine, she didn't flinch. Every barb was met with silence, measured breath, and eyes that didn't break contact. She waited. She let him fill the air with arrogance, knowing that patience itself was power. The more Graham smirked, the more the audience shifted in discomfort. Sensing the imbalance, one side mocking, the other composed.
Oh?
The duel was underway. Every word Graham spoke seemed to escalate the tension. He tried to paint her as inexperienced, as unworthy of serious debate. The harder he pushed, the clearer it became. The crowd wasn't laughing with him. They were waiting for her, because the air was thick with expectation. This wasn't just another political quarrel. It was a test. A test of composure, of strength, of whether dignity could endure mockery. And Crockett was passing with flying colors. Graham leaned back, arms still crossed, trying to project dominance. But his chuckles felt hollow now, echoing in a chamber that was no longer laughing. The audience could feel it. The tide was turning. His performance, once confident, now reeked of desperation. And Crockett, she leaned forward, hands folded. Voice calm, presence unshakable. Every second of her silence was louder than his laugh. Every pause tightened the suspense. The chamber was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. The arrogance of one man had created the perfect stage for the quiet strength of another voice. And then it happened. Graham's laughter cut through the room one final time, sharp and mocking his attempt to dismiss her before she could even begin. But Jasmine Crockett was ready. The camera zoomed closer, capturing every flicker of expression. The audience held their breath. This was the moment, the collision point between arrogance and dignity, mockery and truth. Cliffhanger gives, and with a calm, steady voice, Jasmine Crockett unleashed the words that would flip the room on its head and leave. Lindsey Graham with nothing to laugh about. The air was electric. It's Lindsey Graham's mocking laugh still lingered, but its power was fading. All eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett. For a moment, she said nothing. Silence. Deliberate, piercing silence. It wasn't weakness. It was control. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm, steady, and unshakable. "Senator Graham," she began, her words cutting through the chamber like steel wrapped in velvet. "I know. It's easier to laugh than to listen. But I came here to do something you seem to have forgotten how to do. Deal in facts." The room tensed. The chuckles stopped. Even Graham's smirk faltered. Crockett pressed on, each phrase deliberate, each pause timed like a boxer setting. Up the perfect strike. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth carried its own volume. "You may think dismissing me makes my point weaker. But here's the reality. When you laugh, you're not laughing at me. You're laughing at the people I represent. You're laughing at the struggles they've endured, at the sacrifices they've made, and at the voices you think don't deserve to be heard. And Senator, that's not leadership. That's cowardice." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Staffers exchanged glances. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing Graham's expression as the confidence drained from his face. But Jasmine wasn't. Finished, she built her rebuttal like a crescendo, layering fact after fact, her training as an attorney shining through. She cited precedent, data, history, argument. Graham tried to laugh off, came back sharper, stronger, undeniable. His smirk returned once, briefly, but it looked forced now, brittle, like a mask about to crack. And then came the knockout line. "Here's the difference between us, Senator. You mock because you're afraid. I argue because I believe. You laugh to silence, but I speak to be heard. And in this chamber, the people deserve more than your laughter. They deserve the truth." The chamber erupted. Murmurs, nods, even faint applause, despite the rules. Social media clips of this exact moment would later loop endlessly with captions like "She ended him." Graham shifted in his seat, the bravado gone, tried to interject, but the timing was lost. The crowd wasn't with him anymore. Every laugh he had let slip earlier now hung around his neck like a weight. He had underestimated her, and now everyone could see it. Jasmine's delivery wasn't just powerful, it was surgical. She dismantled his arguments point by point, never once losing composure. She reminded the room of his past contradictions, exposed the weakness in his claims, and framed his laughter as a symbol of everything wrong with Washington's old guard. It wasn't rage, it wasn't theatrics, it was precision, the kind that comes only from someone who has spent years standing up to dismissive voices, knowing she had to be sharper, stronger, and calmer than the people who tried to silence her. And with each line, the tension shifted. The audience, once caught between amusement and discomfort, now leaned fully into Jasmine's corner. Every pause she took felt like an exclamation mark. Every word landed with the weight of lived experience. Finally, she brought it home. "Senator, you can laugh all you want, but history won't remember the chuckle. But it will remember the truth. And it will remember that in this room, on this day, arrogance was silenced by dignity." The silence. After her words was thunderous, Graham's laugh, once so sharp, so dismissive, had evaporated completely. His smirk was gone. All that remained was the image of a man who had underestimated his opponent and been humbled in front of the nation. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She created a moment that lived beyond the chamber, beyond politics, beyond the instant. It was the kind of moment that crystallizes into history, the kind replayed millions of times. Captioned, memed, shared with phrases like "this is how you handle arrogance." And as the cameras captured her calm expression, as the audience sat in stunned silence, one thing became clear. The laugh that began it all was now nothing more than an echo drowned out by the power of truth. Cliffhanger gives, but while the chamber was stunned into silence, outside those walls, the shockwaves were only just beginning. The silence in the chamber spoke volumes, but outside those walls, the world was anything but quiet. The moment Jasmine Crockett finished her rebuttal, staffers' phones lit up like fireworks. Clips of her takedown began circulating within minutes, uploaded by journalists, aides, and even spectators who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. In an era where politics can feel distant, detached, even boring, this was something different. This was raw, unscripted drama, and the internet devoured it. Within an hour, hashtags trended nationwide. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag Graham got served. Hashtag dignity over mockery. Twitter feeds flooded with short videos of Graham's smirk fading in real time, paired with captions like, "and that's how you handle arrogance," and "she shut the whole room down." Memes were instant. One showed Graham laughing at the start, then quickly morphing into a stunned silence with the caption, "when you thought it was a game." Another compared his chuckle to a ringtone, short, irritating, and instantly silenced. But it wasn't just humor. The deeper resonance spread fast. Commentators on both ends of the political spectrum weighed in. Some applauded Jasmine for her composure, calling it a masterclass in grace under fire. Others begrudgingly admitted that Graham had been caught flat-footed. Even late-night hosts couldn't resist replaying the clip to roaring laughter from their audiences. And then came the voices of everyday people. Teachers shared the video in classrooms as an example of debating with dignity. Parents posted about showing it to their daughters. This is what it looks like when someone refuses to be silenced. Veterans tweeted support, recalling times they'd felt dismissed by leaders in power. The ripple effect was unmistakable. Jasmine's rebuttal had transformed into a cultural touchstone. Celebrities amplified it further. Musicians retweeted the clip with applause emojis. Activists recorded reaction videos, breaking down why the moment mattered. Even a handful of politicians, often hesitant to weigh in, praised her courage. It wasn't just a congressional clash anymore. It was a viral event. Came symbolism. People weren't just cheering Jasmine for winning an argument. They were celebrating her for representing every person who's been laughed at, dismissed, or underestimated. The laugh was no longer just Graham's. It became a symbol of systemic arrogance, of every sneer that says you don't belong here. And Jasmine's calm dismantling became the answer, a moment of dignity striking back. News cycles picked it up almost immediately. Morning shows replayed the clip alongside panel discussions. Analysts broke down body language, the shift in Graham's posture, the steadiness in Crockett's eyes. Articles framed it as more than a debate, as a cultural shift. Proof that the halls of power were changing, that the old guard could no longer dismiss new voices without consequence. For Jasmine, the aftermath was validation. Not of her ability, she already knew she had that, but of her purpose. She had spoken not just for herself, but for millions, and now those millions were speaking back, saying, "We heard you. We saw you, and we're with you." Meanwhile, for Lindsey Graham, the laugh that once felt like control became a chain. Wherever he went, it followed. Journalists asked him about it. Clips replayed on cable news. The internet immortalized it. What he thought was a small gesture had transformed into a defining symbol of his arrogance, one that would be impossible to shake. The chamber had gone quiet. Yes, but America was buzzing. Cliffhanger gives, and yet beyond the trending hashtags and viral clips. The deeper meaning of this clash was still to be revealed, a moral lesson that would outlast the news cycle and echo into history. The clips had gone viral. The memes had done their work. The laugh was immortalized, and the clapback was celebrated. But beyond the noise of the internet, beyond the trending hashtags, something deeper was happening. Because Jasmine Crockett's takedown of Lindsey Graham wasn't just about a sharp exchange in a congressional chamber. It was about something far more universal, a question as old as democracy itself. Who gets to be heard? For centuries, laughter has been a weapon of power. It's been used to dismiss, to belittle, to silence. When Graham chuckled at Jasmine, it wasn't just one man mocking one woman. It was the weight of history, the sneer of every gatekeeper who told the outsider, "You don't belong here. Sit down." But Crockett's response flipped that script. With composure and conviction, she showed that dignity doesn't just withstand. Arrogance, it outshines it. Her calm rebuttal became a metaphor for what it means to stand tall in the face of mockery. To speak truth, even when the room is rigged against you. And that struck a chord far beyond politics, because every person watching could see themselves in that moment. The student laughed at in class. The employee dismissed in a meeting. The activist told their cause was a joke. Jasmine Crockett's voice carried theirs. Her strength reminded them that being laughed at is not the end of the story. It can be the spark for something bigger. The moral lesson was simple, but profound. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it responds with clarity so undeniable that even the loudest mockery falls silent. In that chamber, dignity triumphed over arrogance. Truth triumphed over sneers. Representation triumphed over entitlement. And millions watching at home felt something rare in today's politics. Hope. Hope that voices like Jasmine's voices, forged in struggle, rooted in service, and unshaken by condescension, could still cut through the noise. As commentators would later say, it wasn't just a viral moment, it was a mirror. A mirror reflecting America back to itself, divided, yes, but still capable of recognizing the power of authenticity when it appears. Because at the end of the SE day, the lesson wasn't just for Graham. It was for everyone who ever thought laughter could erase truth. And it was for everyone who has ever been on the receiving end of that laughter, wondering if their voice mattered. Jasmine Crockett's response proved it does. Cliffhanger gives, and as the chamber slowly returned to order, one final truth remained. This was more than a takedown. It was a reminder of what America could be. And so, what began with a laugh ended with silence. Lindsey Graham's dismissive chuckle meant to belittle, meant to erase. Instead, became the spark that ignited one of the most powerful clapbacks in recent congressional memory. Jasmine Crockett didn't just shut him down. She elevated the conversation. She reminded America that dignity is louder than mockery, that truth carries farther than laughter, and that one calm, steady voice can turn an entire room. This wasn't just about a viral clip. It was about something bigger. The reminder that arrogance fades, but authenticity endures. That when faced with dismissal, the answer is not to match contempt with contempt, but to rise higher, speak clearer, and hold firm to the values that matter. Because in that chamber, Crockett wasn't just defending herself, she was defending everyone who has ever been underestimated. And in doing so, she gave millions watching a reason to believe that voices like theirs, our voices, belong at the table. And now, it's your turn. If you felt the power of that moment, if you saw yourself in her composure, if you believe dignity must always triumph over arrogance, then don't let this story stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Carry it forward. Because history doesn't just remember the loudest laughs. It remembers the voices that turn them into silence. Subscribe for more stories where truth takes the stage. Share this video so that others can feel the power of dignity in the face of mockery.